This story contains mature subject matter, including references to sexual assault. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'm standing outside the sprawling compound of a company once synonymous with the name Frank Stronach. This is home to the Magna Empire, built by Stronach, who now finds himself the object of a police investigation into alleged sex crimes.
We track his stunning journey from auto parts magnate, a friend to the rich and famous, to the center of a criminal case making headlines around the world.
I remember waking up, lying in bed. I was on my back. He was having sex with me, raping me.
The open secret in the club was that Frank was predatory with young women who worked there.
Stronach, now 92 years old, is facing 18 charges involving 13 women, charges he strenuously denies.
There will be investigations and the truth will come out.
We investigate the charges, some that date back almost 50 years, and examine what the police knew then and now.
I never heard another word back from the police.
And were there enablers in Stronach's powerful inner circle who kept their concerns secret to protect him and his multi-billion-dollar business?
What pisses me off is that there were so many opportunities for the people who understood what was going on to intervene, and none of them did.
I'm Mark Kelley. This is The Fifth Estate.
Toronto in the 1980s. The Big Smoke had just emerged as Canada's signature city. And along Toronto's marquee strip, a throbbing nightclub called Rooney's. Its opulence and excess, a sign of the times. Phil Mowat says he was Rooney's first DJ.
I opened the club in 1975. The joint was jumping. It was kind of designed that you could walk all the way around in a circle outside of the dance floor area, which was great because you go and you hit on a girl at one of the tables, she turns you down for a dance. You can just keep walking as if nothing happened.
A Toronto Sun sunshine boy in the 70s, he became known as Disco Phil. And at Rooney's, he witnessed a revolving door of who's who.
Wednesday was Gordon Lightfoot Day, because Gordon Lightfoot apparently had his studios upstairs.
Great music, high energy, beautiful models, and men that were very well dressed.
Dana June was a Rooney's regular. She was a professional makeup artist connected to the city's celebrities.
You felt like you'd arrived if you were in Rooney's. It was the place to be.
But Phil the DJ says there was one VIP who stood out from the rest.
And one of the waitresses came over and said, "That's Frank Stronach." I said, "Who's Frank Stronach?" He says, "Well, he owns Magna and he owns basically this place as well."
Mowat remembers a special table in the back corner of the club that was always reserved for Frank.
Whoever sat at that table, for some reason they attracted a lot of Dom Perignon. So there was always several bottles on that table. And then, of course, a couple of good-looking girls would join the table.
It was New Year's Eve, 1980, and I was out with a girlfriend, and I remember Mr. Stronach coming over, and he sent us a bottle of champagne. That was his reputation as being a flirtatious guy. He was, I guess, a player.
I'm delighted to see so many shareholders here of Magna.
In the 1980s, Frank Stronach was a rising star in Canada and around the world. He was the CEO of Magna International, a global leader in auto parts manufacturing. Based in the small town of Aurora, 50 kilometers north of Toronto, in the 80s alone, his company's sales had grown 12-fold to more than $1 billion a year.
Frank Stronach was somebody that had this really distinctive philosophy for Canadian manufacturing and Canadian business, and I think it was also an opportunity to indoctrinate some young people into the Magna way, and I was bought into that.
Jane Boone was an 18-year-old student when she won a competitive engineering internship at Magna in 1985 and was interviewed by none other than the CEO himself.
It was an extraordinary opportunity and a very heady experience for an 18-year-old to be in the presence of somebody who'd been on the cover of various magazines, the Globe and Mail. I mean, it was like I'd spent time in the presence of a celebrity.
Did you ever feel the attention that Frank Stronach was giving you was uncomfortable, unnatural, or made you think twice?
Not until I was in my second year.
In her second year, Jane was invited to Magna's annual shareholders meeting in downtown Toronto.
So he enters the area in front of the bar and he sees me and he waves me over, and then he takes my hand and he's talking to another man and he doesn't release my hand. It felt like an eternity.
Jane says Stronach asked her to join him for dinner. She sat with a former Premier of Ontario and other corporate heavy hitters, all members of Magna's board of directors.
I never even got a menu. The wine glasses just mysteriously got refilled all the time. It was dynamic. People would arrive, then they'd leave.
Jane says Frank then invited her to an after party at Rooney's.
We went out on the dance floor and he was physical. It was just kind of crazy. And it's at this moment that Stronach announces that I've had too much to drink, that he's going to take me to the guest house and that the driver should take my car to the guest house. And then he turned to me and said, "Jane, give him your keys." It dawned on me that I'd been caught in a trap.
In 1986, Frank Stronach was 54 years old, one of the most powerful corporate titans in Canada. Jane was 19 and a student.
Typically at a corporate event, if some junior staffer is intoxicated, somebody gives them a taxi to go home, they get escorted to a hotel. They don't get driven 30 miles north of Toronto to an isolated guest house by the CEO.
Now, nearly 40 years later, Jane is reflecting on the sexual encounter that occurred at the executive guest house that night, an experience she recently wrote about in Canadian newspapers. And while she says it wasn't rape, looking back now, she says it certainly wasn't right.
It was a horrible abuse of power, to put it bluntly. 54-year-old CEOs should not be hitting on 19-year-old co-op students in their employ.
Jane Boone now considers she dodged a bullet based on the shocking news that broke this summer.
Breaking news. Frank Stronach, one of the most prominent names in Canadian business, the founder and former CEO of auto parts giant Magna International, has been charged with rape.
In June 2024, the man who built a billion-dollar empire, awarded the Order of Canada, was charged and arrested for 5 sex crimes involving 3 different women, charges that include rape, sexual assault, and forcible confinement, charges Stronach categorically denies. He was released on bail. Later that month, more charges were filed as the case against Stronach grew.
To know that women had come forward and that I wouldn't be facing this alone was a relief.
One of the women whose complaints led to charges we're calling Lee. She's asked for her identity to be protected.
I'd always had a love of horses and have been around them, and that's what I wanted to do for my career.
She alleges she was assaulted by Stronach in 1980. She was 20 and a horse groomer at his Beechwood stables, now known as Adena Springs. So when you were first see Frank Stronach, did you know who Frank Stronach was?
No, I didn't know who he was. It was pointed out to me that he was the owner of the horses.
Weeks before Lee's 21st birthday, she says 2 other stable hands suggested a night out to celebrate.
They suggested we all go to Rooney's, that Frank owned it and we might get a discount there. And When I went into Rooney's, the two girls were already there and they were sitting at a table with drinks. Suddenly, Frank comes walking around this barricade that was beside the table. He's got a bottle of champagne in his hand. He came up to the table and I said, "Oh, I don't drink." And he said, "Oh, you can't brush that off."
So you have a little bit of champagne.
Yeah.
And then what happens next?
Next thing I know, I'm out on the dance floor and he's holding me really, really tight. And I was literally being held like this. And I was trying to get loose. And then he shoves up my skirt and he punctures my pantyhose and he sticks his fingers right inside of me. I gave a push at that moment of saying no, and he took me off the dance floor and he shoved me into the booth and he was still molesting me. There were people there and
nobody said anything?
Nobody said anything.
Lee's recall of the hours that follow include both blackouts and vivid memories. She says she was taken to an apartment with a view of Toronto's harbor.
I remember waking up, lying in a bed. I was on my back, I was looking up at the ceiling, and I could see my face in the ceiling. And I could see him on top of me. And he was having sex with me, raping me. I was just trying to figure out, where am I? How'd I get here? What's going on? And I knew that I was in a bad situation. I mean, him being a rich guy, in my head, he couldn't afford to have, people say things about him and stuff like that. I thought I was going to be dumped in the harbor.
You're saying you're disoriented.
Right.
But you say he raped me.
Right.
Why are you so sure that he raped you?
I had no intention of having sex with him or anybody else. It was just not something I was going to do.
CBC News has also learned of another woman who alleges that in the mid-'80s, she too was picked up by Frank Stronach at Rooney's. And she says she was also taken to a condo on Toronto's harbourfront by Stronach, where she says she was held against her will and sexually assaulted. Both her and Lee's complaints to police are part of the criminal case against Stronach. When we come back, we hear from young women who worked more recently for Stronach.
I knew why I was selected, and I was told to, stay away from him. It's deeply unsettling.
And Stronach himself sits down for an interview with the Fifth Estate.
These are serious allegations and you could end up in prison. This is the possibility here with these charges.
No, my thing is, I'm above everything, right? Look.
But you can't be above the law.
No, we gotta improve the law.
Frank Stronach could be enjoying a quiet retirement, as many others his age would. Instead, he finds himself in the fight of his life. He's facing multiple sex crime charges from multiple women spanning almost 5 decades. The once mighty billionaire could spend the last years of his life behind bars. It's been 70 years since Stronach first emigrated from Austria to Canada. This corporate video from Stronach International revels in his rags to riches story. From his tool and die startup business in a rented garage in Toronto to building Magna, employing more than 170,000 people in more than 24 countries, making him a friend to presidents and prime ministers.
I'm proud to know you. I'm proud of our friendship. I'm proud of the vision you've displayed throughout your business career.
This is not an easy business. This is not something you see every day.
He used part of his fortune building golf courses, horse stables, and racetracks across North America, investing in sports betting and soccer teams. And along the way, he also built a loyal network of friends.
When I spoke with Frank, leading up to this interview, he said, "Tell it like it is, Jack." That said it all for me.
Jack Hurst is a longtime friend who knows Stronach for his charity and philanthropy.
Call of the wild. Here comes some food.
Hurst is a retired marketing executive who runs an animal sanctuary in Port Perry, Ontario.
Okay, come here.
The two met 50 years ago on the board of Big Brothers of Canada.
Everything about the guy was just a shining example of this is what you do when you give back to community. I was proud to be associated with him.
He has demonstrated his conviction to advancing opportunities for young Canadians.
Stronach's community work was cited when he was named to the Order of Canada in 1999, heralded as a great Canadian success story.
He deserves his day in court and has his story heard.
I couldn't believe that they could do this after 4 or 5 decades, come out of the woodwork like this and say stuff like that.
Bev Buck cares for her retired racehorses at her farm in Belhaven, Ontario. For 40 years, she trained prize-winning thoroughbreds, some for Stronach, who she first met back in 1980.
I was very intimidated by him. I couldn't say 5 words in a sentence without stuttering and humming and hawing. He just had so much charisma, it wasn't funny, and he was very good looking, there's no denying it.
She says in his private life, Stronach was a family man who doted on his wife and 2 children, Belinda and Andrew. But in public, she acknowledges he was often the center of attention, especially with women.
We went down to Rooney's for Christmas 2 or 3 times. When the boss walks in and he's worth a lot of money and he's good looking, these girls are just going to go flocking to him.
When word spread that Stronach was facing sex crime charges that date back to the 80s, when Bev worked closely with him, she was shocked.
Well, I definitely never saw him doing anything like this. Come on, boys, come. He never approached anybody while I was around. Let's put it that way.
Thomas, let's go over the charges first.
That shock after Stronach's arrest reverberated far beyond his circle of friends, making headlines around the world.
Just take the thing away.
And the usually camera-friendly Stronach would only deny the allegations, not discuss them. We began our investigation into Stronach shortly after the first criminal charges against him were made public in early June. Then, on the Canada Day long weekend, a surprising twist. An unsolicited email landed in my inbox. The one-line message? Frank Stronach wants to connect with you. Over the next 4 weeks, I spoke to Stronach several times over the phone and met him at his restaurant in Aurora. In early August, he agreed to sit for an exclusive interview with the Fifth Estate. His lawyer, Leora Shemesh, was in the room. No conditions placed on the interview, no questions considered off limits.
Why did you want to sit down and have this interview today?
Well, I want to give people an oversight who I am, what I've done, the way I think, the way I do things, right?
Stronach tried to steer the conversation away from the explosive allegations and towards his safe space, building businesses, growing the economy.
You're not a free person unless you're economically free.
But Frank, excuse me, one of the biggest issues you now are facing are very serious legal charges that have been leveled against you.
Yes.
By 10 women, 13 charges, and you know the list: attempted rape, sexual assault, forcible confinement. These are very, very serious charges. You will be 92 next month. How do you respond to these charges?
I haven't done anything wrong. And we have a lot of data which totally, will prove that those things are lies, okay? But I cannot get into it. But I feel sorry for the woman which makes those charges. Okay?
Frank, we've spoken to some of the women who have made these allegations.
Yes.
And they have a very, very vivid memory of the encounters that they say they still live with, the trauma that they still live with. Why, decades later, would they be lying about this to police and to...
Yeah, but again, I can't talk about that, right? That comes up in a court. I say, look, X, right? It's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, okay? Women might say, look, maybe I could collect some money this way or that way, okay? It's poverty, it's poverty what the problem is.
Do you think that for some of these women that is their goal, to get money from you? That is their motivation?
When I look at some of the things, there's no question. It's quite clear. It's quite clear.
These are serious allegations, and you could end up in prison. This is the possibility here with these charges.
No, my thing is, I'm above everything, right? Look.
But you can't be above the law.
No. We got to improve the law. Those are very serious charges, and I realize that. But on the other hand, I am who I am. And yes, do I like it? No, but it outweighs that I do the right thing. Because when you go to heaven, if you meet God, He knows. He knows, did you do the right thing or the wrong thing?
Our interview ended there, but not our investigation. When we come back.
I think Frank has been arrogant about the charges. I knew that when I worked there was this open secret that Frank had been abusing women, essentially.
For decades, Frank Stronach has led the high-flying lifestyle of a billionaire, founding a global auto parts manufacturing business, breeding championship thoroughbreds, and staging glitzy beauty pageants at racetracks with $100,000 prize money. In 2012, he even created his own short-lived, now-defunct political party in his native Austria called Team Stronach.
Es ist die Wirtschaft, die Wirtschaft, die Wirtschaft.
Stronach got what Stronach wanted, until now.
CBC News has learned Frank Stronach is facing 4 new charges tonight, including rape and indecent assault.
Hey.
This fall, the criminal case against Stronach grew.
Hey, good boy.
Police laid 5 more charges involving 3 new women, bringing the total number of accusers to 13. The once high-flying Stronach has been forced to surrender his passport as he awaits his high-stakes trial. This will put him in the same scalding spotlight as other high-profile sexual assault trials in this country. New York City has been the backdrop for all too many high-profile sex crime cases. I've come here to meet with a forensic psychiatrist who's worked with thousands of victims of sexual assault and later taken on some of their aggressors as an expert witness in the trials of Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein.
How are you feeling?
So what did Barbara Ziv learn about the cases involving the powerful and the privileged?
You can't look around a room and say, this person would never do that. You know, Bill Cosby's a philanthropist in certain ways, and he certainly promoted a lot of good causes. It is not the defining characteristic of somebody.
Is there a paradox that you have to deal with where people would say, when somebody who is rich and powerful has been accused, people would say, well, why would this person ever do that? They're rich and powerful. They wouldn't do something like that.
It feeds their ego. In a way, you know, it makes them feel powerful and or attractive and, you know, dominant. Yes, I know I can have these people who want me, but I want the one who doesn't want me. You know, there are lots of dynamics that go into men who are sexually predatory, including a belief, a narcissistic belief that they have the right to anything that they want.
And why does it take so long for people to come forward, especially if they've suffered this kind of trauma?
Most women think that it's their fault. It's their fault that they went there. It's their fault that they had that other glass of wine. Being a victim of sexual assault always puts you in a position of inferiority. The man not only has been physically overpowering, but 99.9% of the time they are also in a position of psychological or economic or some other type of power over the victim.
Our investigation has uncovered more troubling allegations made by women who worked for Stronach in the decades following those older allegations against him. J.J. Wright was working at a high-end restaurant north of Toronto in 2007 when a man approached her with an offer.
Frank Stronach's lawyer happened to be at the restaurant, and he said, "Do you want a job?" And he gave me his card and told me to get in contact with him and he would get me a job. And so I was curious. I followed up with him. And next thing I knew, I was kind of installed at the Magna Golf Course, and I was 18 at the time.
As a teenager working for Stronach, JJ says she quickly learned a valuable lesson: steer clear of the boss.
The open secret in the club was that Frank was predatory with young women who worked there. And I was told that on multiple occasions by different people. So I was aware that at least one woman had been paid off who he was inappropriate with.
That woman, Nicole Wills, sued Stronach for $250,000 in 2002. She was a bartender at the Magna Golf Club and claimed he harassed her by asking her for her phone number and calling her at home. She said she experienced stress, loss of income, and embarrassment after co-workers teased her for having a, quote, relationship with Stronach after he repeatedly asked her to play tennis with him. In his statement of defense, Stronach said he only called her to arrange a tennis game and that her claim was motivated to embarrass him and extract money from him. The suit was settled the following year. Stronach didn't admit liability, but that didn't stop the whispers.
I don't know if we would have talked that openly about details around the payoffs or any inappropriate behavior that happened, because that could mean losing our jobs.
Complaints about Frank Stronach weren't just an open secret at the Magna Golf Course. The Fifth Estate has learned that two women who say that Stronach sexually assaulted them in the 80s years later went to police with their stories. They both said they wanted Stronach stopped.
So the first time you did talk to the police would be what year?
2015, October of 2015.
35 years after the fact.
Yeah, yeah.
What prompted you to go to the police?
I guess I'd been thinking of it for a long time, like, you are a survivor, but you're not letting anybody know you're a survivor. I was on Twitter a lot, so I was like, it's time to come forward and say something. And I started with the police.
Lee says she went to police in the small Ontario town where she lived. They directed her to Toronto police. She says she sat down for a video interview with two investigating officers, a man and a woman.
It was intimidating. It was really intimidating. I was ready to tell my story, but they kept pushing me. It started to feel like an interrogation. I started to feel like I wasn't being believed.
Do you feel they were judging you?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. When I left there, I was expecting to hear back. I never heard another word back from the police. Not a phone call, not an email, nothing.
Lee took her frustration to Twitter, saying she used the hashtag Frank Stronach is a rapist.
You say you were tweeting Frank Stronach is a rapist because you were angry.
Yeah.
Who are you angry with at this time, all these years later?
I was angry at him and the police. I was angry at myself too for letting it go that long. So, yeah, I was just angry at that time.
We asked the Toronto Police for comment about why Lee's case wasn't followed up on. They said they couldn't comment on cases currently before the courts.
Back in the 70s, 80s, these types of offenses, many women were shamed into not coming forward. And it's only been recently, and even still, it's not, I think, as powerful as it should be for providing an environment that these women feel safe to come forward and actually tell their stories without being judged.
Scott Blandford is a 30-year police veteran in London, Ontario. He says for decades, officers weren't properly prepared to deal with sexual assault complaints.
I did not receive any real training on sexual assault investigations during my early career. It wasn't until later that it started to become mandated and became part of in-service training for police officers.
We wanted to know why the criminal investigation has been moved from the York Regional Police, where most of the alleged incidents took place, to Peel Regional Police, a jurisdiction with no connection to Stronach's case.
In a case like this, it's very high profile. As a result of that, there are connections that are made within the community. Philanthropy, involvement in community work. There's a bit of a bias, a touch of nepotism perhaps, that the investigation may not be conducted appropriately.
The Stronach influence is evident, the name plastered all over York Region. In 1997, York's police chief had to resign after accepting a $125,000 loan from Stronach's Magna. In 2004, Frank's daughter Belinda won a federal seat in Parliament in the region. In 2020, the Stronach Group, run by Belinda, donated $25,000 to a York police chief retirement dinner. And currently, a former York police superintendent oversees security at Magna.
Is Frank Stronach in this case a bit of a hot potato?
Oh, definitely. You simply have to look at the current environment, both in Canada and south of the border, and the perceptions that certain people and certain groups are above the law and they're able to commit crimes with impunity. So public perception is very, very important.
When we come back, the Fifth Estate uncovers shocking new allegations from young women working in a restaurant owned by Stronach.
He drove her into the Walmart parking lot and then proceeded to try and make advances toward her. The doors were locked, so she was like in an enclosed space. She couldn't get away.
This is Frank Stronach today, checking in on his latest business venture, seemingly oblivious to the 18 sex crime charges that may put him behind bars for the rest of his life. At 92, he's building electric cars and bikes. It's a far cry from his days as Magna's CEO, overseeing tens of thousands of workers in factories around the world. He's also invested in the organic food business, running a market and a restaurant in Aurora. But stories from the staff here are now starting to trickle out. The Fifth Estate spoke with 3 women who worked at Frank's Organic Garden, young female employees who describe an uncomfortable and predatory work environment. We've learned that prompted at least one woman to go to police earlier this year, claiming she was sexually assaulted by Stronach. We interviewed another former employee who wanted her identity concealed for fear of retribution from Stronach. Her voice has been altered.
In a way, I was uncomfortable every single time I ever had an interaction with him because he is an intimidating man. Like, he has so much money, he has such a big name and everything.
She says she worked with 3 young women at Frank's Organic Garden who all experienced uncomfortable advances by Stronach.
Frank, with one of the girls, took her aside, and then he gave her a hug goodbye and then grabbed her ass. With the one girl who was taken into the private dining room, when she came out, I could see on her face immediately that something happened to her.
She says she learned of a disturbing encounter with another young female employee who was invited to dinner with Stronach.
Frank went up to her and asked if they could go have dinner at the Keg and discuss possible future promotions, raises, all that kind of thing. So she agreed and went with him. He drove her, instead of over to the Keg, he drove her into the Walmart parking lot and then proceeded to try and make advances toward her. He tried to force her to perform fellatio on him, but she was resisting and pushing back and trying not to. He tried to force his hands down her pants in the car as well, but the doors were locked. So she was in an enclosed space. She couldn't get away. After those happened, he brought her back to the building and just let her go back inside. And she went into the building and cried to some of the other restaurant staff about what happened.
We knew we needed to approach Stronach for another interview.
Well, that is something else.
We met him at his stallion barn within the sprawling family compound in Aurora, north of Toronto. We'd heard the allegations. Now we needed answers.
We wanted to come back. You've always said to me that you want to be open and honest.
Yeah, I talked to you. I watched your programs many times. That guy is pursuing the truth.
We had heard a disturbing story, and I want to get your reaction to it, that you had gone into a car with one of the employees, a female employee, and you had made unwanted sexual advances to this woman.
I would say it's the other way around, okay? That will come up, and I got a very clear explanation, Very clear.
So what's the explanation?
Look, I can't really think here because...
But you're saying that she was inappropriate with you?
If I say the truth will come out, Okay, the truth will come out.
Since our first interview, we'd heard from 3 women who say Stronach used his former nightclub Rooney's to meet and later prey upon women.
Rooney's. Tell us about Rooney's.
It was a happy place, There's no thing here, right? Okay, we had lineups.
But we've spoken to some people, Frank, who called it a hunting ground. It was a place where you would go to get women, and then you would take women from there afterwards to have sex with them.
This is absolutely, where some make statements, it's absolutely wrong. I can look in the mirror, I've never done anything improper.
But he then offers new information about a previously undisclosed settlement with 2 women he'd met at Rooney's.
There was once where my lawyer called me and said, look, I got a complaint from a lawyer that you molested, next to Rooney's was a parking garage. There were just actually the 2 women said, we're leaving now too, and they filed a complaint. So I said to my lawyer, what do you want me to do? Well, I said, look, you have such a high profile, you're riding high, I want you to repay the thing here, and it's over.
A settlement?
It just paid them what they, okay.
We asked him about the condo at the Toronto harbourfront, where we've learned he took at least 2 women who alleged he raped them there after leaving Rooney's.
Did you have a condo down by the Toronto harbourfront?
I was on the board of...
But did you have a condo?
No, I was on the board which built the condo house. And at that time, we had a lot of Europeans coming in, so we, instead of the hotel, we had a condo.
Throughout our exchange, Stronach remains steadfast he's done nothing wrong. He says his name will be cleared in an eventual criminal trial.
There will be investigations, and the truth will come. The truth will come out.
And you have no fear that you will end up behind bars?
I have no fear.
Why are you so certain, Frank?
Well, because I know myself. My friends know me who I am, right? Okay, and a lot of people which worked for me, they know who I am. Okay, that's totally against what I stand for.
What do you stand for, Frank?
What I stand for is justice.
At the time of this broadcast, the charges against Frank Stronach have grown from 5 to 18. Magna, the company he built into a billion-dollar empire before being bought out in 2010, has now launched its own investigation into Stronach's behavior and possible payouts. When asked about the probe, a Magna spokesperson said in part, there are no criminal or civil allegations against Magna. As we've stated before, the allegations made against Mr. Stronach are alarming and, if proven true, completely contradict Magna's core values and beliefs. We asked Magna if they're investigating Stronach's use of a corporate harbourfront condo and the executive guest house north of Toronto. Magna didn't answer our question.
It's appalling that all this silence has happened for so long.
Jane Boone, the once 19-year-old intern at Magna, seduced in plain sight by Stronach at Rooney's in the mid-'80s, says it's time for the silence to be shattered.
It was appalling that he was able to do that and that there were all of these people around him that didn't intervene, that didn't speak up in the face of really despicable behavior.
I think Frank needs a reality check. And whatever that looks like in whatever kind of form of justice, through the criminal justice system or another route, that's what I think he needs.
It got to a point where I was physically ill every single morning, and I couldn't get myself to walk in the door of that building anymore. It made me shake every single time I drove in.
It makes me sad. It's no different than it was in 1980 when I was questioning whether to come forward or not. Seek justice, because, you know, that's what the system's there for.